Well, I think one of the most interesting aspects of what we're facing right now is the reconceptualization of innovation as a people-centered process. That has implications for all of us, obviously us at the Social Science Humanities Research Council, but also for universities, for colleges, for businesses, for the public sector, private sector, and so on. And I think that's really at the heart of our challenges in the 21st century.
So when you say a people-centered model, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think there are two aspects of it. One is the idea that whether you look at the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the new ambition is to understand the people that are really the focus of those activities. So, for example, in the private sector, customers. Now you think, well, what's so revolutionary about that? Haven't companies always been worried about customers? Well, not really. And in fact, most businesses did not really focus on understanding who their customers were, what were their preferences, and so on. They rather took the idea that they'll develop something and then engage the right advertisers and convince people to buy it. Mm-hmm. The new approach is to back up and say, we really need to understand who we're attempting to appeal to. And that's why, for example, all the new successful innovative companies are really focused on customers and their use and their taste and their preferences and so on. They're just beginning to get there, but this is, I think, illustrative of the new approach. This is also across our institutions. Think about schools. Mm-hmm. It's really only in the last little while that we've begun to imagine schools as not being all about the teaching part of it, and instead being about the learning part of it, about the students. Who are our students? It used to be that students would come in, sit down, memorize, and regurgitate. We don't really care who you are. Here it comes, and this is how you're going to be taught. Now we're saying no. That in fact, if we're going to successfully have learners, we have to understand how people learn, different learning styles, and that varies across cultures and so on. So now the whole focus of schools is to really embrace students as being the really important aspect of what they're trying to do, and that will determine how we're going to teach and so on. And you can walk across the sectors, whether it's in the service industry that's attempting to look at users, whether it's in hospitals that for now are saying, you know what, we have to really understand our patients. We can't look at it and just as numbers, just as inanimate objects there. We have to understand what's going on in terms of their lives and how does our interventions best help them in terms of where they're at. And patients are not all the same. So it seems to me that this new focus in terms of the model of innovation has profound implications. The other aspect to this is a people-centered model of innovation. Talks about people moving. It's not simply tech transfer now, it's ideas, it's knowledge that are embodied in people, and they're moving across campus communities, and around the world. It's a contact sport. We're certainly doing that virtually. We're certainly doing that in terms of the new electronic means of communication and so on, and we're trying to figure out how they're used. And again, the issue is not that we're living in a technologically driven society. I would say to the contrary, these new technologies are enabling and accelerating this new paradigm, this new way of conceptualizing innovation. So I think those two parts, whether you think about it as innovation really involving people or innovation, the process itself, in fact, being people-centered, I think that's the deep, deep paradigm shift that we're now living.
That's really interesting. As the president of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to what role the humanities have specifically in fostering innovation and how it is that we can connect up the humanities and the sciences in fruitful ways.
One of the things that I think has been unfortunate about the way in which the ways of knowing have developed, I think, over the last number of centuries, is that in fact they've been separated at some levels. In other words, there's different ways of knowing that have been seen as somewhat as distinct. If you take a people-centered focus, what you know is that humans don't live their lives in terms of economic components, cultural components, social components, and so on. We live our lives in integrated ways, holistic ways. What the humanities teach us is how to think about ourselves, how to think about others, how to think about and interpret the world around us, to give significance and meaning to what we see around us. And it seems to me that we've got to understand that those kinds of questions, those interpretations, the significance, the meaning aspect, is part and parcel of every other aspect of our lives. And so now I think what it does in terms of the humanities is it says that humanities is not something that's added on to. And in fact, humanities are at the core of our prospects, whether we talk about material prosperity, whether we talk about cultural richness, no matter what we talk about, if we don't have a sense of the significance, the meaning, if we don't have ways of interpreting ourselves and others, the rest of it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't matter. And so now I think the research is really showing how we must think about humans in terms of the ways of knowing that are in the humanities, that are in the social sciences, that are in the natural sciences, engineering, biomedical, health fields. We must think about that in integrated, connected ways, just as we live our lives.
That's a great answer. So if we had a larger community of science policy workers in Canada, what do you think the one thing that they should be sort of aiming themselves towards would be?
My sense of the success of this event, as well as of the event last year, it was reflected in the fact that there's an appetite now for us to have discussions about how do we embrace the 21st century in terms of a new model of innovation, a new model of science policy, a new model of thinking about how we can benefit from the different ways of knowing, to what I like to call horizontally connect that, to reimagine successful innovative communities in terms of campuses, innovative campuses, to think about Canada connected to a world in a global pursuit of building successful societies. It seems to me we need to wrap our head around this, and I think the science policy community is helping us by getting that conversation going and getting us to understand that we have gone past the era of the technological fix, the magic pill, the simple solution. We know now that if we're going to succeed in the 21st century, it's not going to be simple. In fact, it's not going to be complicated. It's going to be complex. And in order to get our head around that, we need new vocabulary, new metaphors, new language, new ways of thinking about this, what I like to call new imagining. And I think that's what this conference is doing, and I think that's why we're here, because there's a thirst for that. We know kind of in our souls that what we really need to do is to say, yes, the last few centuries have helped us in the world. I think there's been a lot of progress. I'm an historian. Most historians are very reluctant to talk about progress, improvement, and so on. But then when you ask an historian, you say, what era would you like to live in? Most of us say, well, on balance, I'd prefer to live today. So I think that my sense, at least, is that yes, we have globally, despite all sorts of step backwards and sideways and all sorts of really forgettable aspects of the past few centuries, I think we have gone as far as we could using that old model of innovation. And I think now the way to move forward is to embrace the new model. How do we do that in terms of our policies, practices, institutions, and so on? That's the conversation that this event, I think, is really fostering. And that's why I think people came here last year, and I think that's why they're back this year again. And I think that's why it's so important for us to continue these sorts of exchanges, to get our heads around the deep changes that are allowing us, in fact, in setting the stage for us to really build successful societies in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting interview.
Thank you.